Okay, you have now started your website. You've created a website folder. You've created a new site in Dreamweaver. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just lay out what I call the building blocks, okay, for our page template. Okay. Now there's a couple of rules here. Number one rule is that the first page that you always design always has to be named index.html. That is huge. Has to be named index.html, in this case, .php in other cases, or whatever. The reason for this is just because that's the way it's always been. It's not really a good reason. There's always been, if you don't, here's what used to happen. And web browsers and websites are smarter now, so it doesn't happen. But if you made that mistake and you called it home.html or something like that, way back when I started designing web pages in 1996, and somebody went to voiceboardimaging.com, but your first page wasn't index, it was home, what would happen is they wouldn't get to your web page. They'd just see a list, an index of all your files. And they could go in and see everything that was on your server. Oops. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want that. So the index.html replaces that list of files with an actual page. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, a lot of times if you hit a folder or a web server now that doesn't have an index page, usually the server will give them an error message and say, you're not authorized into this folder, or you can't see in this folder. And so they've gotten a little smarter about that. But 15 years ago, if you didn't do index.html, you could cause yourself a whole bunch of problems because somebody could get into your directory and see all your files, which you don't really want them to do that. If they're really smart, they can find out all the files anyway, but still, you just don't want them to do that. So, what we're going to do here is we're just going to go right up here and you're going to click on the site folder here, and you're going to right click and you're just going to say new file. And it's going to pop up here, and so what are we going to call this file? Index.html. Very good. Okay, so there we go. And then what we're going to do is we're going to double click on it. And if it doesn't open, let's make this a little smaller. If it doesn't open in split view, it might open in code only view or design view. Probably will open in design view. I want everybody to be working in split view. And this is a must. If you're not working in split view, I'm going to yell at you. Sorry, but I'm going to. And the reason for this is part of my goal here is, one, to talk about good design in an art class. But two, I do want you to learn some code. I really do. Because I think it's a really important thing for you to learn. And we're actually going to be designing our web page over here most of the time. So now what we're going to do, and I'm going to put this in a list-by-list thing for you, okay? We're going to go in here, and one of the things you'll notice about the code in HTML is it always starts with the greater than and less than symbols, these little brackets, okay? We're going to use those, and the first thing you're going to do is you're going to add one that says style. And you'll notice everything turns pink. The other thing that you should notice about the code, is that if you notice here it says head for the header, and then at the end of the header, you close the header with another thing that says /head. And that says, okay, now the header's done. So you're going to add style. You're going to hit the return twice, and then you're going to go /, and then notice InDesign finishes it for me. I didn't even have to type style. Now sometimes it drives me nuts, but in this case, we'll go with it. I like it. It's kind of nice. So now we're going to do a couple things. We're going to add our header, our content area, and our footer. We're just going to lay them out, and we're going to block them up. Okay? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit # and header. That's the name of this area of the website. And then I'm going to add a little curvy bracket. See that? And I'm going to hit return. Notice it indents for me. All we're going to do is we're going to set our width and our height, and that's it. And a border so that we can see the space. Okay? So I'm just going to type in width. Oh, whoops. See, it helps if I spell it right. You got to spell it right. And notice as I start typing, it comes up here so I can go, oh, width. Double click. There we go. And our width, we're going to run off of a standard called the 960 standard. Well, I'll describe that a little bit later. But everything is going to be 960 pixels from the start. The reason for this standard like this is actually really important. Especially in this room. We have these gorgeous 27-inch iMacs that have these massive monitors with a ton of resolution, right? If you design a website so that it looks and fits this monitor, it's going to be too big for everybody else. It's not going to fit on their monitors because most people do not have a 27-inch monitor with a resolution of 2600 pixels. Most people have a 1080p style monitor, which is a resolution of about 1900 pixels. Okay? You can take that 1900 pixel monitor resolution, you can turn it vertically with these 27-inch monitors because they're like 1940 pixels tall, something like that. Ridiculous. I mean, so you don't want to design on these and think that everybody's stuff is going to look the same because it's not. You've got to design for kind of like a middle area. Don't want to design for the lowest common denominator, because then you'll be designing stuff for these little 720 monitors that like webbooks have and stuff. You know, I mean, it's good to keep them in mind, but at the same time, we want to design for, you know, basically most people have like a 1080p style monitor. So 960 is the standard, and we'll talk about where the standard comes from later. So we're just going to hit width 960. Now the height, right now, that's going to actually probably change for us, but just for now, we're going to type in a nice even 125 pixels, okay? By the way, you have to do the PX. So you got to do it exactly the way I'm doing it here. And then the semicolon ends that command, and we can go to the next. And then lastly, we're just going to add a border. And the border allows you to do a whole bunch of things. So I'm just going to do a thin border. So 1 pixel, space, solid. And now I have to add my color. So I'm going to just go in here. I'm going to click on color. And I'm just going to make it black, which is the symbol for black is #0000000, which makes sense, right? Semicolon. Now I'm closing my header. So I'm going to close this command. Or set of commands for the header, and I'm just going to hit the other little squiggly bracket, boom. And you notice how it pushes it to the right, indent. Now here's what's really interesting. If I pull back, you'll notice nothing happens, okay? Because I haven't added the header down in the body yet. This right up here, this is the head of the code. This is where we put our styles, okay? But just because we put something up here under the style section does not mean it's going to show up yet. And I'll show you. It'll be kind of fun. So watch this. So we're going to do the next one. So we're just going to go content, squiggly bracket, width 960. Now, there's other ways of doing this, okay? And I'll show you some other ways that we can control this. But for now, we're just going to block these out like this. You can set the body of the document, which is already here for you down here. You can set that to 960 and then do the same thing. But sometimes you don't want to. Oops. So now my height. The content area changes. So if I just type in height 500 pixels, then what ends up happening is if I have more content, it just gets forced out of that box. So what I actually like to do is I'll do a minimum height, min-height. Means that that box will always be 500 pixels minimum, sometimes more. And then we're going to do another border, 1 pixel, solid, #0000000. And squiggly bracket close. Now lastly, we're going to do our footer. Footer, squiggly bracket. What's the width going to be? Whoops, the width. I have a lisp all of a sudden. I'm coding in a lisp. How about that? 960? Is that what you said? Yep. Okay. Pretty simple. Makes a lot of sense. This is logical. Now the footer is always pretty small. 100 pixels is probably a little bit on the big side. Let's do 75. It doesn't really matter. You'll change the height of all of these things probably to fit your design. But for now, we're just going to block that out. And we're going to do another border. 1 pixel. Well, I say, oh, thank you. Haha, you guys are too good. I forgot the PX at the top. Yes. Some browsers, it might not even matter. Some browsers might just assume that I said was saying PX, but others, it wouldn't. So there we go. So now you'll notice I've got my 3 sections here. Now this is where it gets fun. So I'm going to go down here into the body, hit return a couple of times, just give myself some space. I'm going to do that angle bracket, and I'm going to say div. A div is basically a layer or a space in your website. The ID of the div is the name of the div. So what's my first one? What goes at the top? Header. So I'm just going to do ID equals quote header. You don't need to add the pound sign. We'll talk about what the pound signs do later. And then end the bracket, hit return, /end div. Now, here's something that I like to do. I think this is really important because it will get confusing. Then I'm going to do bracket, exclamation point, dash dash. And you'll notice how everything goes gray. This is a comment. If you do the exclamation point and dash dash like this, it tells the browser, ignore this. This isn't a command. This is just going to be an organizational note for me, the coder. End of header div. Dash dash, bracket. Now you notice that these are blue again. So this just tells me that this div command here is the end, okay, of the header. Because once we get into the websites more, we're going to actually place more divs inside here. So you're going to have divs inside divs inside divs, and it can get really confusing where the end of a div is. So I just always end the code like that. So now, next, what's our next one? Div ID equals what? Content, very good. Couple things, slash, okay, exclamation point, dash dash, end of content div. I can't type. And what's our next one? Div ID equals footer. Okay, now watch this. This is going to be really kind of fun. So I'm going to save my index.html and watch what happens over in this window. Boom. And hit the refresh. And now, yeah, ooh is right. And you can back off on the magnification here because the projector I'm showing you this on does not have the same resolution as the monitor that we're on. So I've got some problems with it. So why won't it let? Not sure why it's not letting me back off. But anyway, we'll just go to what's it at? 630 by 702. There we go. So now you can kind of see. Well, you really can't. Why won't it let me change the view? It's very frustrating. Anyway, so you can see this. And the other thing that I'd like you to do is get familiar with this thing. We're going to go up here to the little world symbol to preview. And here's the thing. Dreamweaver, you can't always trust what's in the window here, the design window. So it's always good to preview it in Safari. So you hit preview in Safari. And we'll talk about previewing in different things. So now you can see I've got the header, I've got the content, and I've got my footer. Just blocked out, really kind of rough. Now, some problems. Most websites are not left justified. Most websites are in the center, right? Okay. So I'm going to go add 2 pieces of code to each one of these so that it pushes it in the center. It's really easy. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to add it before the border because we're going to get rid of the border. So I'm going to keep the border at the bottom of this. I'm just going to go margin left, auto, margin right, auto. Now watch what happens when I do this and I go and preview in Safari again. Now the header is always going to stay in the center. You see that? Pretty cool. So let's go back and we'll just add that same code to the other 2 really quickly. By the way, I'm always a proponent. Work smarter, not harder. Highlight those 2 lines. Copy. hit return, then highlight the line, paste. Paste. Save. And now all 3 divs are now in the middle. Okay? Nice and simple. Does this make sense? I know it's going to be a lot to start learning some of the code. There are other ways of doing this, by the way, without having to code it. But here's what I've learned, because I've been teaching websites now for about 5-6 years in this class. If I show you the other ways to do it, and something goes wrong, you won't have any clue how to fix it. And trust me, something always goes wrong with web design. Always. So here, if you have a sense of what's actually happening behind the scenes in the code, my hope is that with a little bit of thinking, and that's always the tough part, but with a little bit of thinking, you'll be able to actually figure out what you did wrong and fix it, rather than me having to come over there, pour through your code, because that's what I would have to do. If something would go wrong, see this insert thing here? You can add divs with this insert thing. That's close. We don't even want to use that anymore. They would insert stuff and they wouldn't know it, and they'd think they deleted it, but they didn't, and it was still there in the code. And so it would screw everything up. And then I'd go in there and I would have to sort through so much crap to find out what was wrong. It would take me literally all periods sometimes just to find one small problem that they did like 10 days ago. So hopefully if we take this step by step with you just adding the code by hand like we just did here, that's going to eliminate a certain number of errors. And one of the things that's always going to be the biggest thing is if something's not happening, if you type something in and it doesn't make a difference, you've got to check what we call the syntax. Did you spell it right? Did you add the PX? Did you have the colon? Did you have the semicolon? It has to be exactly right. One of the things that I'll always do is I'll always go like this. Megrin. My fingers are just moving faster, right? So if I wanted to set the margin for the bottom, I can do that. But right now, it doesn't know what that is because it's misspelled. The browser's not going to accept that command. And sometimes, if you misspell something, it can literally explode your entire website. I mean, everything beyond that line will not work. Sometimes it's not the case, but sometimes, I'm not kidding you, anything below that misspelling just stops working. And it's gone. So, and the other big mistake that oftentimes happens is that you forget to close a div. So you've got the div footer, and then you forget to do the slash div. Or let's say I forgot to do that with the header. What that means then is I start a new div, but then it thinks this one here might be the div for the header, the ending div for the header. And so then it starts getting confused because there's not enough end divs that equals the start div command, and then it just kind of freaks out and everything just kind of explodes on you. So it's really, you got to be precise. You've got to follow a scheme, an organization scheme. You got to figure it out and you got to do it. Okay? And that's just, I mean, you just got to do that. But once you do, we already have a website. I mean, you can just go in here and you can start typing, okay? And you can put your title in just like that, and you could have a website in like 10 minutes, one page, with no graphics or anything else like that. But that's it. What I just showed you right there, that's the basics. That is a web page right there in its purest form. Now, one last thing. This part here, okay, in the blue is called HTML. Okay? The stuff in the pink is called CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets. And what's cool about this CSS is that you can, once you set it up on one page, we're actually going to copy and paste it into an external file, and then it can be shared by all your pages. So once you set up the things like the widths and the margins and everything of those boxes, those divs, you don't have to put this in every single web page. We're just going to copy and paste it into one file, link to that file, and then every web page you make from now on has the same set of parameters for the boxes, and your design is done. So that means that the first page is the hardest, but because of CSS, after that, all the other pages are easy. And we're going to get even better than that. We're actually going to get a little bit into PHP possibly, where you can call in other files, other HTML files. It's kind of cool. Any questions? All right.